the solitude of the exceptional mind. The solitude of great individuals is often misinterpreted as a consequence of social failure or personal disdain. In truth, it is an ontological inevitability, arising not from the rejection of others, but from a fundamental difference in perception. This difference transcends mere intelligence as skill, manifesting instead as a penetrating mode of seeing that dismantles the comfortable, prefabricated world most inhabit. Where the collective navigates life through shared assumptions and inherited scripts, the exceptional mind encounters a landscape of perpetual question, where the scaffolding of convention is revealed as unstable and contingent. Solitude, therefore, is not a chosen isolation, but the spatial and existential consequence of this heightened vision. A necessary distance created by seeing more than the surface allows. The herd and the tempo of perception. Human society largely operates within what Friedrich Nietzsche critically termed the herd instinct, a moral and intellectual ecosystem that privileges sameness, rewards conformity, and instinctively neutralizes disruptive height or depth. This herd does not explicitly persecute intelligence. Rather, it assimilates and flattens it, transforming profound inquiry into utilitarian problem-solving or digestible opinion. Its medium is consensus, its tempo is regularity, and its currency is the immediately shareable. Within this flow, existence is buoyed by a collective reassurance. Meanings are inherited, desires are mirrored, and actions follow approved patterns. The exceptional mind, however, operates at a dissonant rhythm and altitude. It pauses where the herd rushes. It doubts where the herd obeys. It lingers over questions the herd has unanimously answered. This dissonance creates a perceptual mismatch. To remain fully immersed in the collective current would demand a conscious dulling of acuity, a compromise of vision for the sake of belonging. The resulting solitude is thus less an active withdrawal than a passive drift, a natural separation born of incompatible ways of being in the world. Martin Heidegger's concept of das Man, the anonymous they-self, provides a deeper structural analysis of this dynamic. In modern existence, das Man preempts authentic being. It is the disembodied authority that dictates what one thinks, how one feels, what one does. Life under this regime becomes a performance of borrowed opinions and perpetual, hollow participation, a state of busy inauthenticity. For the exceptional individual, this is experienced not as a social inconvenience, but as an ontological suffocation. The chatter of das Man is not merely noise. It is a metaphysical force that dissolves individual depth into a flattened public domain. In this context, solitude transforms from mere loneliness into a necessary act of ontological resistance. It becomes the preserved space where one can encounter oneself and the world apart from the dictations of the they, a sanctuary where being can remain one's own. The genesis of solitude, insight as fracture. History offers poignant illustrations of how a singular moment of unshared insight can initiate this lifelong solitude. Consider the young Albert Einstein, mesmerized by a compass. For most, the compass is a tool, its pointing needle a simple fact. For Einstein, it was an epiphany that shattered ordinary perception. Here was a visible effect commanded by an invisible, pervasive force, a revelation of hidden cosmic architecture. This moment of seeing through the object to its governing principles created an immediate, unbridgeable gap between his perception and the mundane understanding of it. Similarly, Siddhartha Gautama's encounter with sickness, old age and death, the so-called foresights, functioned not as mere observations, but as catastrophic insights that pierced the insulating illusions of his princely life. Where his culture had built elaborate psychological and social structures to deny or ritualize these truths, he saw them with devastating clarity as the structural underpinnings of all worldly existence. This vision of dukkha, often translated as suffering, but more precisely the intrinsic unsatisfactoriness of conditioned existence, made a return to conventional, comfort-based living impossible. His solitude began at the moment his perception exceeded the collective denial. Friedrich Nietzsche would categorize such figures as aristocrats of the spirit. Their aristocracy lies not in birth, but in a tragic capacity for spiritual distance, a valuation of depth and height over the applause of the multitude. To these examples, we can add Arthur Schopenhauer, whose philosophical vision perceived the blind, striving will as the futile essence beneath all phenomenal reality. A perception that made the pursuits of his contemporaries seem like a grotesque pantomime, forcing him into a life of intellectual exile. Or Ralph Waldo Emerson, whose commitment to self-reliance and intuitive communion with the oversoul required a deliberate distancing from the joint stock company of society to hear the authentic whispers of truth. In each case, solitude commenced through a wound of clarity, an insight that tore the consensual veil and rendered the individual irrevocably distinct. The reordering of values and the estrangement from consolation. To orient one's life around ideas, truth, or aesthetic integrity rather than around conventions is to systematically dismantle the architecture of ordinary consolation. Social rituals, status competitions, prescribed ambitions, and the warm reassurance of belonging all derive their power from their unquestioned, shared nature. The exceptional mind, by its very operation, subjects these to interrogation. When examined under the light of a deeper pursuit, whether philosophical truth, artistic authenticity, or spiritual liberation, these consolations lose their authority and reveal their contingency. This explains the apparent detachment or coldness often attributed to philosophers and artists. It is not misanthropy, but a profound existential estrangement. The binding force of shared reassurance no longer holds. Life ceases to be something passively inhabited and becomes an object of relentless scrutiny and judgment, demanding internal coherence over external agreement. The herd instinct demands participation and harmony. Authentic intelligence requires perspective and distance. Thus, the exceptional mind becomes an outlier not out of spite, but by ontological necessity. The burden of clarity, solitude as a double-edged sword. This heightened awareness is both a gateway to the sublime and a carrier of immense burden. It is a form of exposure, stripping away the anesthetic of distraction and routine that protects most from existential gravity. The exceptional mind is consequently exposed to the raw textures of reality, the weight of injustice, the prevalence of mediocrity, the intricate mechanisms of self-deception, and the tragic gap between human potential and its realization. The Buddha systematized this burden as the first noble truth, dukkha, the pervasive stress and unsatisfactoriness inherent in a world of impermanence and clinging. Nietzsche framed it as the tragic consciousness, the pain of seeing how rarely humanity rises to its highest possibilities, coupled with the crushing awareness of eternal recurrence, where this same mediocre drama plays out endlessly. From a psychological perspective, this sensitivity may stem from an evolutionary mismatch. A mind wired for acute pattern recognition, cause-effect analysis, and long-term foresight, traits advantageous in harsher, more immediate environments, now finds itself in a modern world designed to cater to and amplify more basal, distraction-seeking instincts. This mind remains perennially unbuffered, feeling the structural fragility of things with a rawness that others are spared. This burden fosters a unique form of empathy. It is not a sentimental identification, but a clear-eyed recognition of shared vulnerability within the human condition. The solitude that results is thus a double-edged sword. It is a necessary protection for a peculiarly vulnerable consciousness. Yet it is itself heavy with the weight of unshared perception. The individual carries the insight of dukkha, or the tragic vision, not as a theory, but as a lived sensory experience. Solitude as refuge and forge, the alchemy of withdrawal. In response to this burden, solitude evolves from a condition into a deliberate practice, a dialectical space that functions as both refuge and forge. As a refuge, it provides sanctuary from the constant noise of Dasman, the opinions, trends, and performative demands that scatter attention and dilute thought. In this quiet, perception can settle. The mind recovers its density and rhythm. Silence ceases to be an absence and becomes a cognitive space, a necessary medium for depth. As a forge, solitude is the crucible where raw perception is tempered into substance. It is in sustained inward dialogue, on long solitary walks, in spare studies, during deliberate retreats, that fragments of insight coalesce into philosophical systems, artistic forms, or scientific paradigms. The majority of human breakthroughs are not products of committee, but of concentrated, uninterrupted deep work. Without the forge of solitude, intelligence risks devolving into mere reactivity or commentary, and creativity is stifled by the premature pressure of social validation. Emerson championed this alchemical function, arguing in Self-Reliance that solitude is where the individual confronts the infinitude of the private man and draws strength from the source. Here, vulnerability is transmuted into resilience, and isolation becomes a generative tension from which original thought is born. The modern assault on essential distance. The contemporary world, however, has engineered a profound and insidious war against this essential condition. Digital technology, particularly social media platforms and their engagement-optimizing algorithms, constitutes a near-perfect apparatus for the annihilation of cognitive distance and contemplative silence. It creates a universe of perpetual, indiscriminate exposure, where the trivial and the profound are rendered equivalent in a continuous, homogenized stream. Depth requires time, silence, and focus. The digital ecosystem thrives on speed, noise, and fragmentation. It is the material instantiation of the herd, das Man, as a totalizing system. Existence is reduced to a metrics-driven performance, and thinking is replaced by the viral circulation of pre-digested sentiments. Nietzsche might see this as the herd's ultimate technological triumph, the quantification and glorification of the average, where resentment against excellence masquerades as democratic levelling. Heidegger would recognize it as the complete dominance of inauthenticity, where every private moment is pre-formatted for public display. In this landscape, choosing solitude is no longer a natural drift, but a radical, deliberate act of refusal. It is interpreted by the collective as hostility, elitism, or dysfunction, precisely because it represents a living negation of the system's core values: constant connection, instant sharing, and the validation of the crowd. Evolutionary psychology adds that these platforms expertly hijack ancient neural pathways for social belonging and approval, making the choice for solitude a neurologically counterintuitive act that further marginalizes the perceptive individual. The cycle of withdrawal and return beyond contempt. The peril of this necessary solitude lies in its potential corruption into sterile contempt. Withdrawal for the sake of clarity must not calcify into a permanent, disdainful separation. Nietzsche's higher men and Übermensch were not misanthropic hermits, but creators who forged new values to serve as bridges back to humanity, as exemplars of enhanced life. The Buddha attained enlightenment in solitude, but spent the next 40 years teaching a path to liberation for all. Emerson retreated to his study to commune with the oversoul, but published his essays to provoke self-reliance in others. This establishes a critical dialectic withdrawal and return. Solitude is the moment of purification, insight, and strengthening. Return is the moment of communication, compassion, and tested application. Withdrawal without return risks solipsism. The sublime insight withers into a private idiosyncrasy. Return without prior withdrawal guarantees dilution. The individual is reabsorbed by the herd before any transformative idea can crystallize. True compassion, distinct sentimentality, is born from this cycle. It is the clarity of seeing humanity from a distance, stripped of its illusions, coupled with the will to re-engage and offer the fruits of that vision without demanding that the distance be collapsed. Conclusion: solitude as existential fidelity. Ultimately, the solitude of the exceptional mind is neither a psychological flaw nor a romantic accident. It is the existential shadow cast by unanesthetized clarity in a world constitutionally wedded to distraction and superficial consensus. It is luminous in its capacity to reveal the depths of reality, yet heavy with the burdens of unshared perception and existential exposure. It is rarely rewarded by the social order, for it constitutes a silent critique of that order's foundations. Yet, it remains indispensable. It is the protective space that guards the individual's perceptual integrity against the flattening forces of conformity. It is the forge where fragmentary insights are smelted into enduring ideas, artistic masterpieces, and liberating truths. In enduring this quiet distance, one pays the price for a deeper fidelity, not to a tribe or a trend, but to the austere demands of reality itself. The solitude of the exceptional mind affirms a sobering, timeless equation. To see the world with profound clarity is, inevitably, to stand at a distance from it. This distance is not an escape from humanity, but the very condition for understanding it, and perhaps for offering it something of genuine substance.